The last sanctuary. The plasma storm painted the sky in violent shades of crimson and electric blue, casting an otherworldly glow across the barren landscape of Proxima 7. Nolan Frost stumbled forward, his exosuit's warning system blaring in, his ears as the radiation levels continued to climb. 3 years of scavenging on this forsaken rock had taught him to respect the storms, but this one had appeared without warning, swallowing the horizon in minutes. "Come on, you piece of junk," he muttered, slapping the malfunctioning navigation panel on his wrist. The screen flickered weakly, finally resolving into a crude map showing a small structure less than half a kilometer ahead. An old emergency outpost, if he was lucky. A tomb if he wasn't. The first drops of acid rain began to sizzle against his suit's exterior plating as the structure came into view. A half-buried dome of weathered alloy, its once gleaming surface now dulled by years of exposure to the planet's harsh elements. The entrance was partially obstructed by rust-colored sand, but Nolan could see the faint blue glow of emergency power still pulsing within. He forced the door open with his shoulder, wincing at the shriek of protesting metal. The interior was dim but mercifully dry, with the faint hum of auxiliary systems still functioning. Nolan stepped inside, shedding his outer layer of protective gear as the door sealed automatically behind him. "Hello, beautiful," he said to the empty room, taking, in the outdated but functional equipment, just you and me for the next 12 hours. That's when he heard it, the soft, almost imperceptible sound of breathing. Nolan froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the plasma cutter at his hip. "I wouldn't," came a voice from the shadows, feminine, but with an otherworldly resonance that immediately identified its owner as non-human. She stepped forward into the dim light, and Nolan felt his breath catch. She was tall, with skin the color of twilight, a deep, luminescent blue that seemed to absorb the outpost's meager light. Her eyes were large, entirely black except for pinpricks of silver that might have been pupils. The exo-armor she wore was unlike any Nolan had seen before, sleek, almost organic in its design, with symbols etched into its surface that shifted and changed as she moved. "Zinthari," Nolan said, recognizing her species but keeping his distance. The Zinthari were notorious for their technological superiority and general disdain for humans. Long way from the Helix cluster. She didn't respond. Instead, she moved past him toward the door's control panel, her movements fluid and precise. Before Nolan could react, she initiated the emergency lockdown sequence. Heavy blast shields descended over the outpost's only exit with an ominous thud. "Hey!" Nolan lunged forward but stopped when she turned to face him, her posture radiating deadly calm. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "Ensuring our survival," she replied, her voice even. "The storm is the least of our concerns." "That's not your call to make," Nolan said, gesturing toward the sealed door. "Open it." "No." She moved away from the panel, examining the outpost systems with practiced efficiency. "The lockdown stays in place. Look." Nolan ran a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. "I don't know what game you're playing, but I don't have time for this. I need to get back to my salvage ship before the storm passes. Your ship is likely compromised already," she said without looking up from the console she was now accessing. "If you return to it, you'll be dead before you reach orbit." A chill ran down Nolan's spine. "What are you talking about?" The Zinthari finally turned to face him fully. "My name is Varix. I am—" She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "Was part of the Zinthari diplomatic corps. That doesn't explain why you've locked us in here." "Because we're being hunted," Varix said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "And I need to ensure that what I'm carrying doesn't fall into the wrong hands." As if on cue, something heavy struck the exterior of the outpost, causing the entire structure to shudder. Nolan instinctively dropped into a defensive stance, his eyes darting around the room. "That wasn't the storm," he said, his mouth suddenly dry. "No," Varix agreed. "It wasn't." The outpost systems flickered momentarily, the lights dimming before stabilizing. Nolan moved to the nearest terminal, brushing aside years of dust to access the external sensors. Power's draining faster than it should be, he muttered, more to himself than to Varix. Something's interfering with the reactor. Varix joined him at the terminal, her proximity making him tense. The shelter's systems are compromised. We need to reroute the power through the backup grid. We? Nolan raised an eyebrow. You lock me in here, tell me I'm being hunted, and now you want to work together? Your survival instincts override your pride. Varix stated it as fact rather than question. You know we'll both die if the shelter fails. Another impact shook the outpost, this one stronger than the first. The lights flickered again, staying dark for several seconds before returning. Fine, Nolan conceded, moving toward the access panel that would lead to the power distribution hub. But when this is over, you and I are going to have a long talk about boundaries and personal space. For the next hour, they worked in tense silence, Nolan's expertise with human-designed systems complementing Varix's advanced technical knowledge. The outpost's age made repairs challenging but not impossible. Occasionally they would hear scraping sounds from outside, followed by eerie silence. So, Nolan said finally, wiping grime from his hands as they finished rerouting the power, you going to tell me what's out there? Varix hesitated, her silver-flecked eyes studying him. They're called echoes, biomechanical hunters designed to track specific neural patterns. And they're tracking you? Nolan asked, though he already knew the answer. Yes. She moved to the outpost's small monitoring station, bringing up an external view. The storm still raged, but through the violence of plasma and acid rain, dark, shapes moved with unnatural precision. They want what I'm carrying. Which is? Varix touched a panel on her exo-armor, and a small compartment opened, revealing a crystalline data core no larger than her palm. It pulsed with an inner light, lines of code visible within its depths. This contains proof that the recent attacks on human colonies in the Vega sector weren't perpetrated by the Zinthari hegemony, she said, her voice tight. Your government believes we're responsible. Nolan stared at the data core, understanding, dawning. The Vega massacre. That was 3 weeks ago. Over 15,000 dead. And your coalition is preparing for war, Varix confirmed. A war based on a lie. The attacks were staged by a third party hoping to pit our civilizations against each other. Why would anyone? Resources, territory, power. Varix closed the compartment, the data core disappearing back into her armor. The reasons are always the same. Nolan processed this information, years of ingrained suspicion toward alien species warring with the logic of what Varix was saying. And these echoes, they're trying to stop you from delivering this proof? They're trying to eliminate both the proof and the witness, Varix said grimly. Another impact rocked the outpost stronger than before. This time, the lights didn't come back on immediately. Emergency power kicked in, bathing them in eerie red light. They're getting more aggressive, Nolan observed, checking the external sensors again. The storm's beginning to weaken. Which means they can coordinate their attacks more effectively. Varix moved to another terminal, inputting commands with rapid precision. This outpost has more defenses than it appears, military grade. How do you know that? Nolan asked, suspicion creeping back into his voice. Because I've studied your species' architecture extensively, she replied without looking up. This isn't just an emergency shelter. It's a forward observation post, disguised as a civilian structure. Nolan joined her at the terminal, surprised to see systems coming online that he hadn't even known existed. I've been on this planet for 3 years. How did I miss this? You weren't looking for it, Varix said simply. Humans rarely see what they're not searching for. A schematic appeared on the screen, showing not just the outpost, but an extensive network of tunnels beneath it, leading to what appeared to be a much larger facility. What is this place? Nolan asked, his scavenger instincts immediately assessing the potential value of such a discovery. Our way out, Varix replied, her silver-flecked eyes meeting his. If you're willing to trust me. Nolan looked from the schematic to the sealed door, behind which the echoes waited. Then back to Varix, this alien who had forcibly locked him in but might also be his only chance of survival. "Do I have a choice?" he asked wryly. "There's always a choice," Varix said, and for the first time, Nolan thought he detected something like empathy in her voice. But not all choices lead to survival. Another impact, this one accompanied by the sound of tearing metal. Warning lights flashed across the terminal's display. "Hull breach in 60 seconds, announced the outpost's automated system. Nolan looked at Varix's decision made. "Show me these tunnels," as they rushed toward the hidden access panel that would lead them into the unknown depths beneath the outpost. Nolan couldn't help but wonder if he was making the biggest mistake of his life, or if this strange twist of fate might be something more. Either way, the world they had known was about to be sealed away, and what lay ahead was a mystery that would change everything. What lies beyond the hidden access panel slid open with surprising smoothness, revealing a narrow passage that descended steeply into darkness. Above them, the outpost's infrastructure groaned under the relentless assault of the echoes, metal twisting and buckling as the hunters sought entry. "Move," Varix commanded, pushing Nolan toward the opening. "They've breached the outer shell." Nolan didn't need to be told twice. He slipped into the passage, the cool, stale air a stark contrast to the superheated atmosphere of the outpost. Varix followed, her lithe form navigating the tight space with practiced ease. The moment she cleared the entrance, she pressed a sequence of symbols on her gauntlet, and the panel slid shut behind them, sealing with a pneumatic hiss. "That won't hold them for long," she said, activating a light source embedded in her armor. The soft blue glow illuminated rough-hewn walls of compressed basalt, reinforced with alloy supports that bore the faded insignia of the Earth Coalition military. "How far down does this go?" Nolan asked, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "Approximately 300 meters, Varix replied, consulting a three-dimensional projection that materialized from her gauntlet. "The main facility is directly beneath us." They began their descent, the silence broken only by their footsteps and the distant, muffled sounds of destruction above. Nolan's mind raced with questions, but survival took precedence over curiosity. After several minutes of careful navigation through the steep passage, they emerged into a vast chamber that took Nolan's breath away. "What the hell is this place?" he whispered, his voice carrying across the expanse. The chamber stretched before them, easily 100 meters in diameter, with a domed ceiling that vanished into shadow. Ancient machinery lined the walls, most of it dark and dormant, but some systems still pulsed with faint light. At the center stood a massive structure that resembled a particle accelerator, its circular form surrounding a raised platform. "A research facility," Varix said, moving forward cautiously. "Abandoned during the First Contact Wars, if I'm reading these markings correctly." "First Contact?" Nolan frowned, following her. "That was over 70 years ago. Nobody's supposed to be out this far back then." "Your government has many secrets, Nolan Frost," Varix replied, her tone neutral but her implication clear. "As does mine." A thunderous crash echoed from above, followed by the distant sound of metal tearing. Nolan glanced upward nervously. "They're through the access panel," he said. "How much time do we have?" "Minutes at most," Varix replied, her attention focused on the central platform. "The echoes are designed to track neural signatures through almost any barrier." She approached one of the few operational consoles and began interfacing with it, her fingers moving with practiced precision across controls designed for human hands. "Can you access the facility's defensive systems?" Nolan asked, scanning the chamber for potential weapons or exits. "I'm trying." Varix's voice betrayed the first hint of strain he'd heard from her. "The security protocols are extensive. This wasn't just any research facility, it was highly classified." Nolan joined her at the console, recognizing some of the code scrolling across the screen. "This is quantum encryption, military-grade stuff from decades ago. Let me try." To his surprise, Varix stepped aside without protest. Nolan input a series of commands, drawing on knowledge acquired during his less-than-honorable discharge from the Coalition Engineering Corps. How do you know these codes? Varix asked, watching him work. Let's just say I didn't leave military service on the best terms, Nolan replied, fingers flying across the interface. I was accused of accessing files I shouldn't have. They were right. A soft chime indicated successful access, and the chamber hummed to life around them. Lights activated in sequence, illuminating the full extent of the facility. What they revealed made both of them pause. The walls were lined with stasis pods, dozens of them, each containing what appeared to be a sleeping human. But upon closer inspection, Nolan could see subtle differences. Enhanced musculature, modified, cranial structures, neural implants visible beneath translucent skin. They're hybrids, Varix said quietly, approaching one of the pods. Humans in Thari genetic constructs. That's impossible. Nolan shook his head. The Coalition has laws against xenogenetic experimentation, has had for decades. Laws are only as binding as those who enforce them, Varix replied, studying the sleeping figure. These subjects were created before those laws existed, when both our species were still trying to understand each other's capabilities. The sound of metal scraping against stone echoed from the passage they had descended. The echoes were getting closer. We need to move, Nolan said, returning to the console. There has to be another way out of here. There is, Varix pointed, to a schematic now displayed on the screen. A transport tunnel leading to a surface exit point approximately 2 kilometers from here. But, she hesitated. But what? It runs through the facility's containment sector. Whatever they were researching here, they kept it isolated for a reason. Nolan weighed their options, which were rapidly dwindling to none. I'll take mysterious containment over certain death by biomechanical assassins. Varix nodded, her silver flecked, eyes reflecting the blue light of her armor. Agreed. They made their way across the chamber toward a sealed doorway marked with hazard symbols in multiple languages. Nolan accessed the control panel, and after a tense moment, the door slid open, revealing a sterile corridor beyond. Stay close, Varix said, drawing a weapon from her armor, a sleek curved blade that hummed with energy. And be ready to run if necessary. They had barely taken 10 steps into the corridor when the facility's alarm system activated, blaring in rhythmic pulses. Red emergency lights flooded the space, casting everything in a blood-tinged glow. Warning. Containment protocols activated. Facility lockdown imminent, announced an automated voice, the words echoing through the corridor. All personnel evacuate immediately. I think we triggered something, Nolan said unnecessarily, increasing his pace. The echoes must have accessed the main systems, Varix replied, her voice tight. They're trying to trap us. They broke into a run, following the corridor as it curved downward, deeper into the facility. The alarm continued its relentless wail, accompanied now by the sound of heavy security doors slamming shut in distant sections. There. Nolan pointed ahead to where the corridor opened into another smaller chamber. That should be the transport access point. They burst into the chamber, only to stop short at what awaited them. The transport, a sleek, cylindrical pod, designed to travel through vacuum tubes, sat ready on its launch track. But between them, and it stood 3 figures unlike anything Nolan had ever seen. They were vaguely humanoid in shape, but their bodies seemed to shift and ripple as if their very molecules were in constant flux. Where faces should have been, they had only smooth, reflective surfaces that mirrored Nolan and Varix's own shocked expressions. Echoes, Varix breathed, raising her weapon. The creatures moved with unnatural grace, spreading out to surround them. Nolan reached for his plasma cutter, knowing it would be woefully inadequate against such advanced pursuers. They followed our neural patterns, Varix said, backing up slightly. But they shouldn't have been able to move so quickly through the complex. Unless they've been here before, Nolan replied, a terrible realization dawning. Unless this facility is connected to whoever sent them. The lead echo tilted its featureless head, and then spoke in a voice that seemed composed of dozens of others, layered and distorted. The data core, it said, extending a rippling limb toward Varix. Surrender. It and your deaths will be painless. Who sent you? Varix demanded, her blade held ready. Who benefits from war between our species? The echo made a sound that might have been laughter, Those who have always profited from conflict. Those who see both humans and Zinthari as resources to be exploited. The consortium, Nolan said suddenly, pieces falling into place. The mega corporations that operate outside coalition jurisdiction. They've been pushing for access to Zinthari technology for years. The Echo's reflective face shifted, briefly displaying what might have been approval. The human understands. Pity such knowledge will die with him. Without warning, the creatures attacked, moving with blinding speed. Varix met the first one with her energy blade, the weapon slicing through its shifting form and causing it to emit a high-pitched wail. Nolan dodged the second, using his engineering knowledge to access a nearby panel and overload a power conduit. Electricity arced across the chamber, catching the Echo mid-lunge and disrupting its molecular cohesion. But the third reached Varix from behind, its limbs elongating to wrap around her armored form. She struggled, her blade falling from her grasp as the creature began to pull her toward the chamber's far wall, where a containment field hummed with malevolent energy. "Nolan," she called out, her voice strained. "The data core. Take it." She managed to eject the small crystalline device from her armor, just as the Echo tightened its grip. The core skittered across the floor, coming to rest at Nolan's feet. Time seemed to slow as Nolan faced a choice that would define whatever remained of his life. He could take the core and run, leaving Varix to her fate. The transport pod was there, ready to carry him to safety. He could deliver the data himself, become a hero, maybe even clear his name with the Coalition, or he could try to save her, this alien who had locked him in a shelter and dragged him into a conflict he never asked for. The remaining Echo lunged toward the data core. Nolan scooped it up and, in the same fluid motion, hurled it directly into the transport pod through its open hatch. Then he grabbed Varix's fallen blade and threw himself at the creature restraining her. The energy weapon sliced through the Echo's form, causing it to release Varix with another unearthly shriek. She dropped to the floor, momentarily stunned, but alive. "The core," she gasped, looking around frantically. "In the transport," Nolan replied, helping her to her feet as the wounded Echoes began to reform, their molecules realigning. "We need to go now." They sprinted for the pod, diving inside just as the Echoes regained their cohesion. Nolan slammed his palm against the launch control, and the hatch sealed with a pressurized hiss. Through the viewport, they watched as the creatures surged forward, only to be halted by the sudden activation of the launch sequence. The pod shot forward into the vacuum tube, acceleration pressing them back against the padded interior. Behind them, the facility grew smaller until it vanished from view entirely. "Why did you save me?" Varix asked after a long silence, her eyes studying Nolan with new intensity. Nolan shrugged, suddenly uncomfortable under her gaze. "Seemed like the right thing to do. Besides, someone needs to deliver this data, and I don't exactly have diplomatic credentials." Varix's expression remained unreadable, but something in her posture shifted, tension easing slightly. "The Coalition outpost at Helio Station is 3 days' journey from here. If we can reach it, I can transmit the data to both our governments simultaneously." "And then what?" Nolan asked, the reality of their situation setting in. "The consortium won't stop just because they failed this time." "Then we continue," Varix said simply. "We find proof of their involvement, expose their operations, dismantle their power." "We?" Nolan raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a long-term commitment." For the first time since they'd met, Varix's features softened into what might have been a smile. "You locked yourself in a dying shelter with me, Nolan Frost. You faced down Echoes with nothing but a scavenger's tools. I believe humans have a saying about the type of allies one finds in desperate times." "Strange bedfellows," Nolan supplied, returning her almost smile with one of his own. "Indeed," Varix replied, her silver-flecked eyes holding his. "It seems we are no longer strangers." The transport pod continued its journey through the darkness, carrying them toward an uncertain future, but one they would face together, an unlikely alliance born in a shelter where a door had closed on one world, only to open to possibilities neither of them could have imagined.